Section 1. The Year of Our Discontent. Canadian Politics in the Hot Seat. Remember when politicians promised transparency, accountability? Yeah, good times. The year 2024 has been a banner year for scandals, blunders, and policy faceplants. From coast to coast, Canadians are wondering who's steering this ship? And more importantly, are they even trying to avoid the icebergs? Ontario's Greenbelt scandal reeks of backroom deals and blatant disregard for the environment. Quebec's fiscal woes have ignited a firestorm of protest against austerity measures. Meanwhile, a false alarm in Fort Nelson exposed the fragility of our emergency response systems in the age of misinformation. And if that wasn't enough, New Brunswick's education reforms have reignited the language debate, pitting French and English speakers against each other. But wait, there's more. On the global stage, Canada's support for Ukraine's controversial military tactics is drawing criticism both at home and abroad. The aftershocks of these events are still being felt, but one thing is clear. The Canadian public's trust in their elected officials is at an all-time low. So buckle up, Buttercup. We're about to dive headfirst into the dumpster fire that is Canadian politics in 2024. Get ready for some head-scratching, some eye-rolling, and maybe even a little bit of vomit-inducing outrage. You've been warned. Section 2. Ontario's Greenbelt, a scandal rooted in land and greed. The Greenbelt, a precious band of protected land surrounding Toronto. It's supposed to be safe from developers. Well, guess what? It wasn't. Turns out, the Ford government secretly removed 7,400 acres from the Greenbelt. Why? To build houses, they said, but the real winners? Big developers, many of them donors to the Conservative Party. Shocking, right? The public reaction? Outrage. Protests erupted. Environmental groups cried foul. Even the Auditor General got involved, slamming the government for its lack of transparency. The whole thing reeked of cronyism and corruption. It was a classic case of politicians putting the interests of their donors ahead of the public good. The fallout from the Greenbelt scandal is still unfolding. The government is facing multiple investigations. Public trust in Doug Ford has plummeted. The scandal has also highlighted the growing influence of developers in Ontario politics. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting our environment. This isn't just about a few trees. It's about who gets to decide the fate of our land. It's about whether our governments serve the people or the highest bidder. And in the case of the Greenbelt scandal, the answer is pretty damn clear. Section 3. Quebec's fiscal fury, when austerity bites back. Quebec, land of poutine, Celine Dion, and crippling austerity? The province has been grappling with a massive deficit. The solution? Slashing public spending naturally. The government cut funding for healthcare, education, and social services. The result? Chaos. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Teachers went on strike. Social workers were stretched thin. The people of Quebec felt the pain. They took to the streets in protest, demanding an end to the cuts. The government, however, remained unmoved. They argued that the cuts were necessary to balance the budget. The Quebec austerity crisis is a textbook example of what happens when governments prioritize fiscal discipline over the well-being of their citizens. It's a story about the human cost of economic policies that look good on paper, but wreak havoc in the real world. The protests eventually died down, but the anger and frustration remain. Quebecers are left wondering, was it all worth it? Or did the government sacrifice their future for a balanced budget? Only time will tell. Section 4. Fort Nelson's false alarm. A case study in misinformation and panic. Picture this. A quiet Sunday morning in Fort Nelson, British Columbia. Suddenly the emergency alert system blares to life. There's a wildfire raging towards the town. Evacuate immediately. Panic ensues. People scramble for their belongings, fleeing their homes in terror. But there's just one problem. There's no fire. Turns out it was a false alarm. A technical glitch sent the entire town into a frenzy. The real culprit? A faulty weather sensor. It seems almost comical, right? But the incident exposed a serious flaw in our emergency response system, its vulnerability to misinformation. In the age of social media, fake news spreads like wildfire, pun intended. A simple error can quickly escalate into mass hysteria. The Fort Nelson incident is a stark reminder of the importance of reliable information during emergencies. It also highlights the need for robust systems that are resistant to false alarms and technical glitches. The good news is that nobody was hurt. The bad news is that it could have been much worse. The incident served as a wake-up call for emergency management officials across the country. It forced them to confront the challenges posed by misinformation and to strengthen their systems to prevent similar incidents from happening again. Section 5, New Brunswick's Educational Divide, the French Language Battlefield. New Brunswick, land of lobster rolls and linguistic warfare. The province has long been a battleground for French language rights. The latest skirmish? Education reform. The government proposed changes to French immersion programs. The goal? To improve French proficiency among English-speaking students. Sounds innocuous, right? Wrong. The proposed changes were met with fierce opposition from both sides of the language divide. Francophones felt the reforms didn't go far enough to protect French language and culture. Anglophones worried that their children would be disadvantaged. Protests erupted. The debate turned ugly. The New Brunswick education clash is a microcosm of the larger language tensions that have simmered in Canada for centuries. It's a reminder of the challenges of maintaining a bilingual country in a world where English dominates. It also highlights the deep emotions that language evokes, particularly in a province with such a complex and often painful history. The government eventually backed down from the proposed reforms, but the damage was done. The debate left a bitter taste in the mouths of many New Brunswickers. It also exposed the fragility of the province's linguistic peace. Section 6, the global stage, Ukraine's controversial tactics and Canada's role. Canada peacemaker, diplomat, lover of maple syrup, and supporter of controversial military tactics, the war in Ukraine has forced Canada to make some tough choices. One of the most contentious, providing military aid to Ukraine, including weapons and training. Canada's support for Ukraine is unwavering, but some of Ukraine's tactics, like using cluster munitions, have drawn international condemnation. These weapons are indiscriminate and pose a significant risk to civilians. Canada's support for Ukraine, even as they use these controversial weapons, has sparked a heated debate. On one hand, Canada has a moral obligation to help Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. On the other hand, Canada has a responsibility to uphold international law and to avoid supporting actions that could harm civilians. It's a classic dilemma with no easy answers. The debate over Canada's role in the Ukraine war is a reminder that foreign policy is rarely black and white. It's about navigating complex moral and ethical dilemmas. It's about balancing competing interests and making difficult choices with imperfect information. And sometimes, it's about accepting that even the best intentions can lead to unintended consequences.